The grease was popping before the sermon ended. You could smell onions through the fellowship hall doors and hear foil peeling back from covered dishes still warm from the drive. Those tables held cooking that never made it into any cookbook. Here are 30 black church potluck dishes that disappeared after the 1980s. The smell of chicken and spaghetti casserole meant it was Fifth Sunday, and Fifth Sunday meant every woman in the congregation brought her best. This was not Italian food, this was church food. Spaghetti noodles broken in half, boiled soft, folded into a sauce made from canned soup and Velveeta, layered with shredded chicken and a can of Rotel tomatoes for heat. The dish came together in a 9x13 aluminum pan covered tight, and it traveled in the front seat like a passenger. Every church mother had her own version, and every version started an argument nobody settled. Some used mushroom soup, some used broth, and Sister Williams always put green bell peppers in hers, which half the deacons refused to touch. By the 1990s, fewer women had the time to break down a whole chicken for the filling, and the dish slipped off the table. The pan is still in the cabinet. The woman who filled it is not. In the 1950s, a can of pink salmon cost 35 cents and stretched into enough croquettes to fill a platter for the whole congregation. The trick was leaving the bones in. You mashed them into the fish with a fork until they dissolved, and that was the calcium, though nobody called it that. The salmon was mixed with cracker crumbs, a beaten egg, diced onion, and enough black pepper to make your nose sting. The patties were shaped by hand and fried in cast iron until the crust turned copper brown and crackled under the spatula. The white gravy came from the same pan. Flour stirred into the leftover grease, milk poured slow, while the arm never stopped moving. These croquettes rode north with the Great Migration, tucked into church kitchens from Chicago to Detroit. A 35-cent can became a $10 memory nobody thought to write down. She made it every third Sunday without fail, a 7-up pound cake so tall it barely fit under the foil. The recipe first appeared in a 7-Up promotional booklet in 1953, and by the 60s, it lived in nearly every black church kitchen in the South. The soda replaced baking powder entirely, and the carbonation lifted the batter into something impossibly light for a cake made with 3 sticks of butter. She creamed the butter and sugar for 12 minutes, never rushing, and folded the 7-Up in last with a wooden spoon, never a mixer, because she said the bubbles needed to stay whole. The glaze was powdered sugar and more 7-Up, drizzled while the cake was still warm so it soaked into every ridge of the bundt pan. After she passed in 1987, her daughter tried it twice. The measurements were right, the oven was the same, but the cake sat flat both times, and she never tried again. You never touched the deviled eggs until the pastor had been served. That was the rule, and if you broke it, the church mother who made them would find out. They always found out. The earliest American recipe for deviled eggs appeared in Montgomery, Alabama in 1877, and by the 1940s, the dish owned every black church gathering from Mississippi to Maryland. The filling was mashed yolks, mayonnaise, yellow mustard, sweet pickle relish, and a pinch of sugar nobody admitted to adding. The paprika on top was not optional, it was tradition. Every church had at least 2 women who believed their eggs were the best, which meant 2 platters set at opposite ends of the table. The politics of whose eggs ran out first was discussed in the parking lot for weeks. Kids pocketed 3 or 4 at a time, hiding them in napkins, and the evidence, yellow smudges on Sunday shirts, gave them away every time. Now the platters come from the store, sealed in plastic, and every egg tastes exactly the same. Long before the eggs were plated, the stewed chicken had already been on the stove since dawn. A whole hen, Not a young fryer, but an old bird with tough legs and thick skin went into the pot with water, salt, a halved onion, and a bay leaf. West African one-pot cooking lived in that method, the same slow extraction of flavor from a single protein that had sustained communities for centuries. By noon, the meat slid off the bone, the broth had turned golden, and the kitchen smelled like something sacred. The chicken was pulled apart by hand, never cut, and served over white rice with broth ladled on until the grains softened. One hen fed 40 people that way. The women who cooked for the church arrived before sunrise and stayed through the last prayer. When those women got too old to stand at the stove, nobody replaced them. The pot still sits in the church kitchen closet. The burner stays cold. Lima beans, simmered with ham hocks, held their spot on the potluck table from the 1940s through the 70s, and the women who made them never consulted a recipe. The dried beans soaked overnight by the sink. In the morning, they went into a heavy pot with a smoked ham hock, the joint cut that butchers gave away because nobody with money wanted it. The beans cooked low for hours, absorbing the smoke and salt until they turned creamy and the broth thickened on its own. The West African tradition of slow cooking legumes with smoked meat survived the Middle Passage and settled into Southern kitchens so completely that most families never knew its origin. A single pot cost under $1 and fed a church pew's worth of people. The beans were always served with cornbread, never rolls, never white bread, and the cornbread was for sopping up the broth at the bottom of the bowl. When canned limas appeared, the overnight soak vanished, and with it, the texture that made the dish worth the wait. Okra crossed the Atlantic in the braids and pockets of enslaved West Africans. The Igbo called it okwuru, and it was one of the few seeds that survived the Middle Passage. By the 1940s, tomato and okra stew was a summer staple at black church suppers across the Deep South. The okra was sliced thick and fried first in bacon grease until the slime cooked out and the edges crisped. Then came the tomatoes, fresh in July, canned in winter, with onion, garlic, and a pinch of sugar to cut the acid. It went over white rice, and the bowls came back empty. The secret was timing. Okra had to hit the hot grease alone first, or it turned the whole pot stringy. You learned that by watching, not reading. Church gardens in Alabama and Georgia grew the okra alongside the tomatoes, and the women who tended those gardens stirred the pot. When the gardens went quiet, so did the stew. The name came from Laugh-In, but the cake belonged to the church. Sock It To Me cake appeared in the mid-1960s when Duncan Hines printed the recipe on their butter cake mix box, and within a year, it was on every fellowship hall dessert table from Memphis to Baltimore. The genius was the cinnamon pecan ribbon through the center, brown sugar, chopped pecans, and cinnamon swirled into the batter before baking, so when you cut a slice, the dark veins spiraled through the golden crumb. Sour cream made it dense and moist. The glaze was powdered sugar and milk poured thin so it dripped down the bundt pan ridges. The women who brought this cake knew exactly how long to let it cool before glazing. Too soon, and the glaze disappeared. Too late, and it sat like paint. That timing was never in the recipe. By the 2000s, boxed mixes changed their formulas, the cake stopped rising right, and the women who knew how to adjust were already gone. A head of cabbage cost a dime in the 1950s and fed the entire deacon board. Smothered cabbage with smoked turkey wings was the quiet workhorse of the potluck. Never the star, always the first dish, scraped clean. The method was African at its root, the same slow braising of greens with smoked meat that West African cooks practiced for centuries. The cabbage was cut into thick wedges, never shredded and layered with smoked turkey wings, onion, garlic, vinegar, and red pepper flakes. It cooked covered on low until the leaves went translucent and the turkey fell apart. The vinegar was the insider detail, just a capful added early to keep the cabbage from turning gray. Women who skipped it served dull, colorless cabbage, and the difference was visible from across the room. Bright, faintly golden meant the cook knew what she was doing. Gray sat, untouched. You saw the punch bowl before you saw the food, cut crystal or pressed glass, borrowed from the same church mother every time, and inside a lake of pink or green with a melting island of sherbet floating on top. The recipe was ginger ale, fruit juice, and a half-gallon of sherbet, stirred just enough to fizz. Through the 1960s and 70s, this punch stood at every church function from Easter to homecoming, and children lined up for it before anything else. Lime sherbet made it green, raspberry made it pink, orange was the one nobody liked as much. The woman in charge guarded her station like a deaconess guarding the offering plate. Nobody added ice because the sherbet was the ice, and if someone dropped in cubes anyway, it became a scandal that lasted through Wednesday Bible study. By the 90s, 2-liter bottles replaced the crystal bowl, and the bowl went back to the cabinet where it sits next to the memory of the hands that polished it. If the punch was what the children came for, the pig feet stew was what the old folks would not leave without. The feet that butchers threw into the scrap bin in the 1930s and 40s were hauled home for pennies by women who understood what slow heat and vinegar could do to cartilage. Scrubbed, split, and simmered for hours with potatoes, onions, bay leaves, and a heavy pour of apple cider vinegar, the connective tissue broke down until the broth turned thick as gravy. The meat pulled away in silky ribbons, and the potatoes absorbed the gelatin-rich stock until they barely held on a spoon. At church homecomings in the rural South, annual gatherings that brought families back to the congregations their grandparents had founded, this stew sat next to fancier dishes and outlasted everyone. The generation that understood what a pig foot could become was the same generation that never came home from the hospital. The dressing was never stuffed inside the bird. That was the first rule, and breaking it marked you as someone who did not grow up in these kitchens. Cornbread and giblet dressing was baked in a cast iron skillet, and the cornbread was made days before, dried on the counter until it crumbled between your fingers. The giblets, heart, liver, gizzard, neck were boiled in their own pot, chopped fine, and folded into the crumbs with sautéed onion, celery, sage, and enough broth to make the mixture wet but not soupy. The ratio was the whole secret, and nobody measured. You poured until it looked right, and if you had to ask what right looked like, you were not ready. Louisiana churches added rice. Mississippi left it out. The argument crossed state lines and never got settled. At Thanksgiving potlucks, the dressing arrived in the same pan, carried by the same woman, set in the same spot. When she stopped coming, someone tried to fill it. The pan never tasted the same. Eventually, the spot just stayed empty. Every September, the canning circle met in the church kitchen. 6 or 7 women with bushel baskets of green tomatoes, cabbage, onions, and hot peppers from gardens giving their last harvest before frost. Chow relish was the product, a tangy condiment rooted in both Appalachian and African American preserving traditions. The vegetables were chopped by hand, salted overnight to draw the moisture out, then cooked down with mustard seed, celery seed, turmeric, and enough vinegar to fill the kitchen with a sting that made your eyes water from the doorway. The jars lined the church pantry like jewels, pale green, flecked with red, and came out for every potluck, spooned over beans and greens and rice. One deaconess in rural Georgia added ground mustard that turned hers bright yellow and hot enough to clear sinuses from across the table. When the garden shrank and the women aged out, the jars stopped appearing and September passes, now without anyone reaching for a mason jar. Neck bones braised over rice carried more flavor per penny than almost anything else on the table. Pork neck bones, small, bony, threaded with collagen, cost next to nothing in the 1940s because butchers called them waste. The bones went into a heavy pot with onion, garlic, a bay leaf, and water just to cover, then simmered 3 or 4 hours until the meat surrendered and the broth turned almost sticky from dissolved cartilage. The rice was cooked separately, always separately, never in the broth, because the grains needed to hold their shape. The bones were piled on top, the gravy ladled over, and the dish arrived at church in a pot heavy enough to need both hands. Eating them was its own skill. You worked around small bones with your teeth, pulled the meat in thin strips, and let the gravy soak into the rice. When boneless pork became cheap, nobody wanted to work that hard for supper anymore. This was not creamed corn from a can, and calling it that would get you corrected by every woman in the kitchen at once. Fried corn started with fresh sweet corn. Cut off the cob with a sharp knife, then scrape with the back of the blade to get the milk out. That milk was everything. The corn went into a cast iron skillet with bacon grease, butter, sugar, salt, and pepper, cooked low until the sugars caramelized and the edges turned golden. Indigenous and African cooking traditions met in that skillet. The corn from Native American agriculture, the frying technique carried across the Atlantic. It showed up at church suppers in July and August, served straight from the iron. The scraping was the part nobody volunteered for. 20 ears to fill one pan, and it tore up your hands. When the women who scraped stopped coming, frozen corn took over, and the dish lost everything that made it worth remembering. It arrived in a cut glass bowl that weighed more than the salad, and nobody under 20 could explain why it was called a salad at all. Ambrosia, canned fruit cocktail, shredded coconut, miniature marshmallows, maraschino cherries, and sour cream folded into something pink and cloud-like. Sat on every black church potluck table from the 50s through the early 80s. Sweet, cold, and completely out of place next to the greens, which is exactly why the children loved it. The church mothers debated coconut, fresh grated versus bagged, the way they debated scripture, and the woman who used Cool Whip instead of sour cream was discussed in the parking lot the same way. Canned fruit cocktail was considered modern and elegant in the 50s, a convenience that freed time for the dishes requiring real skill. Then, one Easter, the bowl was there, and the next it was not, and nobody announced it or voted on it. The only ones who noticed were old enough to remember what the glass felt like in their hands. Baked spaghetti was not the same as chicken spaghetti, and confusing the two could start a conversation you did not want to have. This version used ground beef browned with onion and garlic, stirred into tomato sauce, then layered with cooked noodles and topped with shredded cheddar. It baked until the cheese bubbled and the edges crisped dark. The dish lived between Italian food and soul food, belonging fully to neither, claimed entirely by the church. Through the 60s and 70s, it showed up at Wednesday night suppers and youth group dinners because a single pan fed 20 teenagers who would eat anything with melted cheese on top. The woman who brought it always cut it into squares, not scoops. That was the till that it was church spaghetti. The squares held their shape on a paper plate, and that mattered when you were eating standing up in a fellowship hall with no tables left. The sound of dried butter beans hitting the bottom of a metal bowl was the sound of Saturday night in a church kitchen. Someone was always soaking beans for tomorrow. Salt pork, a slab of cured, unsmoked belly, went into the pot with the soaked beans and onion and water, simmering on low for the better part of a day. The salt drew out slowly, seasoning the beans from the inside while the fat rendered into a broth that was creamy without cream. West African cooks had paired legumes with cured meat for centuries before this dish ever reached a church hall in Mississippi. The beans were served in shallow bowls with the pork broken on top, and the broth was thick enough to hold a spoon upright. The last woman at Mount Zion Baptist who made them passed in 2003. Her granddaughter found the bowl and did not know what it was for. It was always made the night before and always served cold. Cucumber and onion salad, sharp with white vinegar, sweet with a spoonful of sugar, clear as water in the bowl. The cucumbers came from the church garden or a deacon's backyard, thick-skinned, seedy, the kind you peeled and sliced by hand. White onions, cut into rings so thin you could see through them, went in with the cucumbers, and the whole thing soaked overnight in vinegar, water, sugar, salt, and cracked pepper. By morning, the cucumbers had gone translucent and the onions had lost their bite. The salad traveled in the same Tupperware every Sunday, snapped shut because vinegar would ruin a car seat in minutes. Nobody talked about it, but everybody finished it. When the church gardens dried up and the plots turned to lawn, the cucumbers came from the store, too watery, too thin-skinned, soft by noon. The Tupperware is still in the cabinet, the garden is not. Half the children ran from it, and the other half pretended to. Liver and onions smothered in brown gravy divided the fellowship hall clean down the middle. The old folks lined up with purpose. The young ones found reasons to disappear. Calf liver was sliced thin, soaked in milk to draw out the bitterness, dredged in seasoned flour, and fried in cast iron until the outside crisped and the center stayed soft. The onions went in after, cooked slow in the same pan until they collapsed into golden ribbons. The gravy was built from drippings, thickened with flour, stretched with broth until it turned dark and silky. In the 40s and 50s, doctors prescribed liver for anemia, and church mothers who served it believed they were feeding both body and spirit. The iron in one serving could carry a field worker through Monday. When health trends turned against organ meat in the 80s, liver left the table so fast it left a grease stain and a silence where the pan used to sit. There was a time when the fanciest dish on a church table was a quivering ring of tomato aspic unmolded onto a bed of iceberg lettuce. Tomato juice set with unflavored gelatin, seasoned with Worcestershire, celery salt, and a dash of hot sauce, chilled in a ring mold until it held its shape. This was the dish church women in the 50s and 60s used to show they had time, skill, and a refrigerator cold enough to set gelatin overnight. The center was filled with chicken salad or left hollow, garnished with sliced boiled eggs in a pattern that took longer than the aspic itself. Savory, tangy, and cold, it cut through everything else on the table. The younger generation never understood it. By the 80s, gelatine molds had become a joke, and the aspic stopped appearing without ceremony. The ring mold went to the back of the cabinet, behind the punch bowl, where it gathers dust beside a reputation it can no longer defend. When the church needed to feed 50 and the budget said 30, somebody made chicken and dumplings. The drop-style dumpling was the black church kitchen version. No rolling pin, no board, just spoonfuls of thick batter dropped straight into bubbling broth where they puffed up and sealed the flavor inside. A whole hen simmered for hours until the meat fell apart, the bones were pulled, and the broth went cloudy with fat. The batter was flour, salt, baking powder, and enough milk to make it sticky, the consistency of wet cement, as one church mother in North Carolina called it. She dipped her tablespoon in hot broth so the batter slid off clean. The dumplings cooked covered for 12 minutes, and lifting the lid early was the fastest way to get banned from the stove. The dish stretched endlessly. More broth, more dumplings, more people fed from the same pot. Nobody makes it from a whole hen now. The store-bought birds are faster, but the broth is thin, and the dumplings float in something trying to remember what it used to be. Green peppers lined up in a baking dish like soldiers, tops cut off, seeds hollowed out, each one packed with a mixture of ground beef, rice, onion, and tomato sauce seasoned the way the cook's mother seasoned it. Stuffed bell peppers were individual portions in a culture that cooked for crowds, and that made them special. The filling was assembled the morning of the potluck, the peppers stuffed by hand, and the pan baked until the tops blistered and the rice swelled inside the walls. West African cooks had been stuffing vegetables with grain and meat long before the dish reached the church kitchen in the South. The woman who made them counted heads before she started. One per person, no extras, because the filling was too expensive to waste. When ground beef hit $2 a pound in the late 70s, the peppers got smaller, and by the 90s, they had quietly left the rotation. The pudding was made on the stove, not from a box, and that was the line that separated the church mothers from everyone else. Real banana pudding started with a cooked custard, egg yolks, sugar, flour, and whole milk whisked over, medium heat until the mixture coated the back of a spoon. Vanilla went in last, off the heat, and the Nilla wafers were layered with sliced bananas and warm custard in a dish deep enough to hold 4 layers. The meringue was beaten stiff, spread thick, and browned under the broiler until the peaks turned gold. This was not the cold whipped cream version. This was baked, warm, and heavier than it looked. The women who made it from scratch could tell by taste whether someone had used instant mix, and that shortcut was treated like a personal insult. The first spoon always went to the oldest member present. When the last from scratch woman passed, the instant version took her place, and nobody said a word about the difference out loud. Older than the pie and harder to find, sweet potato pudding was the dessert that came before anyone thought to put sweet potatoes in a crust. Raw sweet potatoes were grated by hand on a box grater, knuckles and all, then mixed with eggs, evaporated milk, sugar, cinnamon, nutmeg, and vanilla. The batter poured into a buttered dish and baked low and slow until the top caramelized into a dark, crackled skin and the inside set like custard. This preparation traced back to West African root vegetable cookery, where yams were grated and baked long before European contact. In the 30s and 40s, sweet potato pudding appeared at church homecomings, always made by the oldest women, the ones who remembered it from their own grandmothers. The grating was brutal work. When food processors arrived, the texture changed, smoother, less rustic, and the dish faded into sweet potato pie. The pudding died with the hands that grated it. The block of cream cheese sat on a glass plate with pepper jelly poured over the top and a sleeve of Ritz crackers fanned beside it. That was the appetizer, greeting you at the fellowship hall door before you reached anything else. The pepper jelly was homemade, cooked from hot peppers grown in the church garden, and its color ranged from pale green to deep red, depending on who made it and which peppers came in that year. The sweetness hit first, then the heat crept up, and the cream cheese cooled everything just in time. The women who made the jelly were the same ones who ran the canning circle, tended the garden, and unlocked the kitchen at 5 in the morning. The recipe was spoken, never written. When the last of them handed over the keys, the garden grew weeds, the canning pots went to the basement, and the pepper jelly became store-bought, which is to say it became something else entirely.
Baked macaroni and cheese was the crown jewel of every church supper, golden and bubbling beneath its crust. The noodles were cooked just enough, layered with sharp cheddar and evaporated milk in heavy pans that once belonged to someone's mother. No one used measurements, just instinct, passed down through taste and touch. When that oven door opened, the smell alone made people drift toward the kitchen. The cheese melted into a silky river, clinging to each noodle until it became more than a side dish. It was family history disguised as comfort food. Kids hovered close with their plates, hoping to get the corner pieces where the cheese crisped just right. Grandmothers guarded their recipes but always shared a serving, smiling at the next generation and saying, "Now this is how it's supposed to taste." On potluck Sundays, the pan came back scraped clean, proof that love and patience never wasted. It was food that reminded people of who they were and why the best things in life take a little time to bake. Black-eyed peas with ham hock simmered in church kitchens year-round but held special significance on New Year's Day when congregations gathered to eat them for luck and prosperity. Dried peas were soaked overnight, then cooked slowly with a single ham hock that released smoky, salty flavor while onions and garlic added depth. The result was creamy beans in thick pot liquor served as soup or over rice, with ham hock's meat pulled from bone. Churchwomen understood a little meat went far when combined with beans, providing protein without the expense of steaks beyond most budgets. Black-eyed peas cost almost nothing, with dried bags available for pennies, perfect for feeding large crowds after Sunday service. The dish carried deep cultural significance, connecting congregations to Southern agricultural traditions and New Year's customs promising good fortune. Children ate them without complaint because Potlikker's richness made beans taste special, while adults appreciated both nutrition and continuity with tradition. Cornbread dressing had the power to hush a crowded room. Crumbly, golden, and rich with sage and broth, it was the dish everyone waited for. It started with leftover cornbread, dried and crumbled, then mixed with onions, celery, and whatever broth simmered on the stove that day. The smell rose thick and savory as it baked, the edges crisping just right. It carried the weight of care, a dish that took planning, patience, and heart. At church suppers, people lined up twice just to get another scoop. It was heavy with meaning, like Sunday itself, feeding body and spirit in equal measure. Each bite was tender but bold, soaked through with flavor and memory. The secret was always in the seasoning. Not just sage, but the way it was stirred by someone who knew exactly when it felt right. It was a dish that demanded respect, the kind that made silence fall between bites. Cornbread dressing was not made quickly. It was built layer by layer, like prayer. Even when the pan was scraped clean, the smell lingered, wrapping the room in something that felt a lot like gratitude. Sweet potato pie with nutmeg was the signature dessert distinguishing African-American church suppers, a pie so beloved that families guarded recipes and church mothers competed silently. Sweet potatoes were roasted until tender, then mashed smooth and mixed with eggs, evaporated milk, brown sugar, butter, vanilla, cinnamon, and generous nutmeg that gave filling its distinctive warmth. The mixture was poured into flaky crusts and baked until filling set firm, but remained creamy, with tops developing slight sheen. Churchwomen made multiple pies for every supper, knowing sweet potato pie would disappear quickly. Sweet potatoes were inexpensive year-round and stored well in pantries, making them practical for feeding dozens. The pie represented African-American culinary tradition at its finest, with roots tracing to West African yam preparations. Children grew up knowing sweet potato pie was superior to pumpkin pie, understanding this was their dessert, their tradition, their taste of home. Collard greens with ham hocks were the backbone of every potluck table, steaming and savory, filling the room with their deep, earthy scent. The greens were washed over and over in cool water, not just to clean them, but to honor the work that went into growing them. The ham hocks simmered for hours until the meat softened, sending flavor through every leaf. The pot itself would tremble gently on the stove as if humming along with the gospel songs on the radio. Grandmothers knew the timing by feel, not clocks, tasting the broth and nodding when it was ready. A good pot of greens could stretch a meal, feed a family, and feed a crowd all the same. When carried into the church basement, the steam fogged the lids of the serving trays, and everyone nearby could smell the salt, the smoke, and the love. These greens told stories about sharecropping days, about Sunday rest after long weeks, about making something nourishing from whatever you had. Nothing on that table ever felt more alive. Even if money was tight, you could always count on greens to show up, hearty and humble, served with hot sauce and pride. Gullah red rice with sausage carried Carolina Low Country traditions into fellowship halls, a dish with roots in West African jollof rice seasoned through generations. Long grain rice was sautéed in bacon drippings with onions, bell peppers, and garlic before crushed tomatoes transformed the mixture into something rich and red, with smoked sausage adding protein. The rice absorbed every bit of flavor as it simmered, turning tender with each grain coated in tomato-rich seasoning. Churchwomen from coastal regions brought this proudly, knowing it represented cultural heritage connecting congregations to ancestors who never forgot their origins. Rice was inexpensive and fed dozens when stretched with vegetables and meat, making it practical for church budgets. The tomatoes added vitamins while sausage provided richness to satisfy working people arriving hungry. Gullah red rice appeared at Wednesday suppers and Sunday dinners, signaling someone understood honoring traditions while feeding community. Fried whiting fish was the heartbeat of summer services and Sunday fundraisers, popping and hissing in cast-iron skillets behind the church. The fish was dredged in seasoned cornmeal, fried until golden and crisp, the edges curling slightly as they hit the hot oil. The sound alone could bring a crowd. Children ran back and forth with paper plates while elders fanned themselves with church programs, laughing and waiting for the next batch. You could taste the salt of the sea, the crunch of tradition, the work of hands that knew how to stretch a meal. Fried whiting was affordable, filling, and familiar, something every soul food cook could trust to come out right. Sometimes it was served with white bread and mustard, sometimes with coleslaw and hush puppies, but always with pride. It was food that traveled well, from kitchen to fellowship hall to picnic table, and it never lost its magic. Every piece was a little miracle of patience and grease, the taste of good company and good faith. Peach cobbler with hand-rolled crust arrived at church suppers in rectangular pans, golden pastry bubbling with fruit juices that caramelized at edges while centers stayed tender. Fresh peaches were sliced during summer when abundant and cheap, tossed with sugar, cinnamon, nutmeg, and lemon juice before being covered with pastry dough rolled thin. The cobbler baked slowly until crust turned golden and peach filling thickened into syrup pooling in corners, creating bites ranging from crispy edges to fruit-soaked centers. Churchwomen made these in home kitchens early Sunday morning, timing baking so dessert was slightly warm when served. Peaches in season cost little at roadside stands, with bruised fruit perfect since it would be cooked down anyway. The dish represented summer abundance and preserving seasonal fruit, with families often canning peaches for year-round cobblers. Children lined up eagerly, hoping for corner pieces with extra crust, while adults savored the combination that tasted like celebration. Chicken and dumplings were a comfort for the congregation, a stew that could stretch to feed however many people showed up. The broth simmered slow, thick with flour and flavor, while soft dumplings puffed up on top like little clouds. Every spoonful was a reminder that simplicity could still taste divine. It was always served from a big enamel pot, the kind that never stayed empty long. The chicken was tender, the dumplings tenderer, and the warmth endless. Grandmothers stood near the stove ladling out bowls with quiet smiles saying, "There's more in the back." It was food that didn't run out, not when love was cooking it. The broth was rich with time and care, deepened by whatever herbs grew in the yard or window box. The dumplings soaked up everything, fluffy yet hearty, made to satisfy both hunger and heartache. You could taste the faith in every bite, the belief that food, like kindness, multiplies when shared. On cold days, this dish healed. On good days, it celebrated. Either way, it fed more than just the body. It fed the soul. Smothered pork chops in gravy represented church supper luxury, transforming inexpensive cuts into something special through slow cooking and proper seasoning. Thick pork chops were seasoned with salt, pepper, garlic powder, and paprika before being dredged in flour and fried until golden, then removed while onions and bell peppers were sautéed in drippings to build gravy's foundation. The chops returned to the pan submerged in rich brown gravy made from pan drippings, broth, and flour, then simmered slowly until meat became tender. Church kitchens filled with the smell during preparation, announcing this would be a special meal worth attending. Pork chops cost less than other cuts and could be purchased from Black-owned butcher shops where families had credit accounts, helping stretch budgets. The gravy was the secret, thick and savory with bits of caramelized onion throughout, perfect for spooning over rice or soaking up with cornbread. Candied yams were memory disguised as dessert, gleaming under syrup that caught the light like stained glass. They started as humble sweet potatoes, peeled and sliced by hand, then simmered with butter, sugar, and a whisper of cinnamon until they melted into themselves. Every forkful felt like Sunday comfort, the kind that lingered even after the plates were cleared. The smell filled every corner of the church hall, warm and familiar, bringing people back to childhood kitchens. There was something sacred about watching elders spoon them out with quiet pride. This dish did not need decoration. It already carried the glow of love. The yams were passed down like stories, like names, unchanged through generations because nothing about them needed fixing. When people said, "sweet," this is what they meant. The caramel syrup bubbled thick and glossy, coating every piece in warmth, the kind that stuck to memory long after taste faded. Sometimes a sprinkle of nutmeg or clove gave it a deeper note, but never too much. The sweetness spoke for itself. Candied yams did not rush. They took their time, slow and sure, like all things made with patience and heart. On church tables, their color alone brought smiles, that deep orange glow of comfort that meant home had arrived. Fried whiting fish brought coastal traditions inland to fellowship halls, providing affordable protein that could feed large crowds without expensive fish like snapper. Whole whiting were cleaned and scaled, then scored on both sides before being heavily seasoned with salt, pepper, cayenne, and garlic powder. The fish were dredged in seasoned cornmeal, creating crunchy golden coating when dropped into hot oil, with flesh inside staying white, flaky, and tender, while exterior turned crisp. Church fish fries became community events where men gathered around outdoor fryers while women prepared sides, with smell drawing neighbors from blocks away. Whiting was among cheapest fish available, with whole fish costing just pennies per pound and small bones that could be eaten when properly fried. The fish provided complete protein and essential fatty acids, making them nutritious choices that satisfied appetites. Children learned to navigate small bones expertly, picking meat clean and leaving behind perfect skeletons. String bean casserole with bacon and onions was the kind of dish that looked simple but carried weight. Fresh beans were snapped by hand, tossed into pans with crisp bacon and caramelized onions until the whole kitchen smelled alive. The recipe came before shortcuts, before cans and mixes, when people built flavor from scratch. That first bite was smoky, soft, and sweet, a hymn sung through taste. On church Sundays, this dish always disappeared first. The bowl went around once, twice, and came back empty, a quiet testament to good hands and good memories. The bacon fat gave the beans their soul, coating them in flavor that whispered of long days in the kitchen and even longer days in the fields. A little sugar balanced the salt, a trick passed down by women who knew that even vegetables deserved indulgence. It was a dish that spoke softly but stayed with you, proof that the simplest foods could feel the richest. Mustard potato salad appeared at every church supper in large bowls, its bright yellow color from prepared mustard distinguishing it from mayonnaise versions and giving it tangy sharpness that cut through rich meats. Potatoes were boiled until tender, then cooled and diced before being mixed with chopped onions, celery, hard-boiled eggs, sweet pickle relish, mayonnaise, and generous squirts of yellow mustard. The result was creamy and tangy with textural variety from crunchy vegetables and creamy potatoes, served cold during long gatherings. Churchwomen made potato salad in enormous quantities, knowing it was essential accompaniment to fried fish, barbecue, or any main dish needing starchy, cool contrast. Potatoes were among cheapest vegetables available year-round, with 10-pound bags costing less than $1. The mustard added minimal cost but maximum flavor. Families developed strong preferences for their church's version.
Those kitchens went quiet, and the recipes left with the hands that made them. Like and subscribe if you remember the taste.